Picture a Saturday evening. The city outside your window is buzzing with a low, chaotic hum of traffic and distant conversations. You open your phone and immediately step into a digital gallery of other people's crowded lives. You see the group selfies, the clinking glasses, the wide smiles, and the inevitable captions declaring lifelong bonds and endless weekends. Society whispers a relentless message into our ears from the time we are very young. We are told that the ultimate peak of human existence is a crowded room, that the absolute measure of your worth is the sheer number of people you can summon on a Friday night. We are conditioned to believe that a wide social net equals success, status, and safety. But then you take a slow, deep breath, put the phone face down on the table, and look at your own reality. You are sitting alone. Your phone has not vibrated with a message in 2 days. The mere thought of navigating a group chat, of pretending to care about the trivial updates of 10 different people, makes a wave of exhaustion wash over you. If you were to say out loud to a coworker that you do not have a best friend, or that you do not belong to a squad, you know exactly what would happen. You would see their eyes shift. You would feel the weight of their pity, mixed with a quiet suspicion. They would immediately attach a label to you. They might assume you are depressed, socially inept, or harboring some fundamental flaw in your personality. They think your software has a glitch. But we need to pause right here and dismantle that assumption entirely. What if this solitary existence is not a failure of connection, but a deliberate optimization of your mental resources? What if the underlying architecture of your brain is simply calibrated for a different kind of reality, one that processes the world with a depth and precision that a crowded room completely destroys? Today, we are going to break down the biological, neurochemical, and mathematical realities of people who choose to live without friends. By the time we finish, you will see that this isolation is not a deficit. It is a highly specialized, intensely efficient way to exist. To understand why the absence of a social group feels like a heavy, sinking stone in the chest for so many people, we have to look back at the original design of the human machine. We must rewind the clock roughly 200,000 years to the brutal, unforgiving environment of the prehistoric savanna. Biologically speaking, human beings are an incredibly fragile species. We do not have armor. We do not have venom, fangs, or the muscle density to fight off apex predators. We are remarkably slow runners compared to the creatures that hunted us. In that ancient landscape, any individual who wandered away from the tribe was not making a lifestyle choice. They were signing their own death warrant. The only biological superpower our species possessed was the collective. The pack meant survival. It meant that while you slept, another set of eyes watched the dark tree line for danger. It meant that a successful hunt was divided, ensuring you did not starve during a harsh winter. Therefore, being ostracized, being pushed out of the circle of firelight, was literally a physical death sentence. Because the stakes were absolute zero or survival, the human brain engineered a ruthless, overpowering alarm system to ensure you never left the group. Modern neuroscientists have placed subjects inside functional MRI machines to observe what happens when a person experiences social rejection. What they found is a stunning piece of evolutionary engineering. The anterior cingulate cortex, the exact same region of the brain that lights up like a warning beacon when you break your arm or burn your hand on a stove, also illuminates when you are left out of a social group. The ancient hardware running inside your skull, physical trauma, and emotional isolation are indistinguishable. When you are alone, the default setting of the average human brain is to flood the nervous system with cortisol and adrenaline. It is screaming at you, asking where your protection went. This stress response makes the heart rate elevate and sleep become impossible. Conversely, when the average person squeezes into a loud, crowded room, the brain releases a wash of safety hormones, turning off the alarm. This is why the vast majority of people are desperately chasing social groups. They are not merely looking for entertainment. They are blindly obeying a 200,000-year-old biological mandate for physical safety. So, when society sees you eating alone at a restaurant, looking completely at peace, the primal, ancient part of their brains genuinely panics. They cannot comprehend why your survival alarm is not ringing. But evolution is not a static process. It constantly iterates, producing variations and specialized adaptations. Some brains are wired differently, and this brings us to the first major mechanical difference between the crowd seeker and the solitary individual. It comes down to a quantifiable neurochemical threshold, specifically the balance between dopamine and acetylcholine. Let us build a framework to understand this. Think of a concept we will call the stimulation index. We can define this index with a simple spoken equation. Total stimulation equals the intensity of the environment multiplied by your brain's sensitivity baseline. For the average, highly social person, their neurological sensitivity to dopamine is relatively low. Dopamine is the chemical of external reward, novelty, and anticipation. Because their sensitivity is low, they require a massive external intensity to reach an optimal state of satisfaction. They need loud music, constant chatter, new faces, and shifting dynamics. To them, a crowded party acts as a charging station, pumping their total stimulation score up to a comfortable baseline. Now, contrast that with the solitary brain. Your brain possesses an extraordinarily high sensitivity baseline to dopamine. Therefore, if we look at the equation, total stimulation equals intensity times sensitivity, placing you in a high-intensity environment like a networking event, creates an immediate, overwhelming mathematical product. The result is an overload. A loud, crowded space is not a reward for you. It is a biological sensory assault. It maxes out your stimulation index within minutes. This is exactly why you experience what feels like a severe social hangover. You are forced to retreat to your quiet apartment for 3 days just to let your chemical levels drop back to a tolerable state. Instead of dopamine, your brain prefers to run on a completely different, much smoother neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. While dopamine drives a person to look outward for chaotic rewards, acetylcholine drives a person inward for sustained, focused peace. It is the chemical of deep learning, intense focus, and quiet reflection. When you spend 5 hours alone reading a complex book, working on a personal project, or simply sitting on a porch watching a storm roll in, society looks at you and assumes you are depressed. They are mathematically wrong. You are actually flooding your system with a highly efficient, premium fuel that crowd addicts simply do not have the capacity to process. You do not lack joy. You are just optimizing for a cleaner, longer-lasting chemical state. Now, let us shift our framework and look at human connection through the cold, objective lens of economics and energy expenditure. We need to talk about the social return on investment. The brutal, unspoken truth of human interaction is that it is staggeringly expensive. Friendship does not merely cost the price of a coffee or a movie ticket. It costs a massive amount of metabolic and cognitive energy. You are required to remember birthdays, track the complex histories of their past relationships, absorb their complaints, and constantly modulate your tone to maintain harmony. But for the solitary individual, there is an additional, massively expensive tax, which we can call the acting fee. Think about the energy required to wear a social mask. How many times have you sat across from an acquaintance, actively forcing your facial muscles into a polite smile while listening to a story that provides absolutely zero intellectual value to you? How many times have you nodded in agreement, suppressing your own thoughts, simply to keep the peace, while your brain desperately calculates how soon you can politely leave? We can map this as an explicit energy equation. Let us say you wake up with a daily cognitive capacity of 100 units of energy. You go to a casual group dinner. The baseline cost of attending is 10 units, but the acting fee, the cost of filtering your true personality, suppressing your natural introversion, and forcing small talk, drains an additional 20 units. Your total investment is 30 units. Now, what is the return? Perhaps you get a fleeting moment of amusement, valued at 10 units. Your social return on investment is calculated as the value received, which is 10, minus the total cost, which is 30. That leaves a net deficit of negative 20 energy units. You have essentially burned 20% of your daily life force on an interaction that left you emptier than when you started. People who choose to have no friends are intuitively running this math every single day. You are a highly selective energy investor. You look at the equation and realize that spending 30 units of energy for a negative 20 return is a catastrophic way to run your life. So, you simply stop making bad investments. You stop scattering your energy across dozens of superficial connections. Instead, you retain those 30 units and redirect them into high-yield assets. You pour them into mastering a skill, building a business, cultivating a rich internal world, or perhaps investing all of it into one single, profoundly deep partnership. You are not broken or incapable of friendship. You are just refusing to participate in a losing economic game. This radical shift in energy allocation naturally leads to the development of a unique psychological architecture. In sociology, there is a foundational concept known as the looking glass self. This theory states that the vast majority of human beings do not actually possess a solid, independent sense of who they are. Instead, they build their identity entirely out of the reflections provided by the people around them. If they want to feel funny, they require a room full of people to laugh at their jokes. If they want to feel valuable, they require a steady stream of notifications, likes, and invitations. They are constantly outsourcing their self-esteem to a decentralized network of other people. Their emotional state is a fragile, fluctuating commodity that is entirely controlled by the market of public opinion. If the group decides they are suddenly uncool, their entire identity collapses. But when you strip away the friend group, when you systematically remove all those external mirrors, a painful but transformative mechanism engages. Without a squad to reflect your value back to you, you are forced to construct your identity from the inside out. When you face a severe disappointment, a career failure, or a heartbreak, and you have no designated best friend to dump your emotional weight onto, you have to process the raw data yourself. You have to sit quietly with the uncomfortable failure, analyze your own missteps, and manufacture your own resilience. This process is grueling, but the math behind it is flawless. By surviving without an external support net, you forge absolute psychological autonomy. Your self-worth becomes a constant, an absolute value, rather than a variable dependent on external inputs. You do not need a committee to approve your life choices, your hobbies, or your career path. While the socialites live in perpetual, quiet terror of being cancelled, boycotted, or simply forgotten by their group, you operate with total immunity. You cannot be exiled from a kingdom where you are the sole inhabitant and the absolute ruler. Society calls this loneliness. But when you look at the mechanics of this independence, it is actually the definition of peak freedom. But let us maintain our absolute intellectual honesty here. We cannot simply romanticize isolation without examining the dark matter that sometimes creates it. We must run a different diagnostic on the root cause of this solitude. For a specific subset of solitary people, living without friends is not the result of a calculated neurochemical optimization or an energy investment strategy. It is the result of a survival mechanism built in response to severe trauma. Let us trace the logic path your brain might have taken. Perhaps during your formative years, you were subjected to relentless bullying in a school environment. Or perhaps, as an adult, you placed 100% of your trust into a profound friendship, investing massive amounts of emotional capital, only to experience a catastrophic betrayal. When the human brain experiences an emotional wound that deep, it rewrites its own code to prevent a recurrence. It establishes a ruthless binary formula. The brain calculates that human vulnerability equals severe pain. Therefore, to reduce the probability of pain to zero, you must reduce your human vulnerability to zero. You construct massive, impenetrable walls around your life. You decline invitations, you keep conversations incredibly shallow, and you project an aura of complete self-sufficiency. You tell yourself and the world that you simply do not need anyone. But the underlying variable driving this equation is fear. You stay inside the fortress not because you enjoy the architecture, but because you are terrified of the unpredictability of the outside world. If you recognize this specific pattern within yourself, it is critical to observe it objectively, without judgment. Your brain executed a mathematically logical defense sequence. It did exactly what it was supposed to do to keep you alive and functioning during a crisis. It stopped the bleeding. However, a defensive structure is meant to be a temporary shelter during a siege. It is not meant to be a permanent tomb. If your isolation is rooted entirely in fear, the work ahead of you is to slowly adjust the variables, to test small, controlled exposures to trust, so that your solitude remains a sanctuary of choice rather than a prison of trauma. Now, let us flip the perspective again and look at one of the most paradoxical stereotypes about loners. The societal assumption is that people who avoid others are cold, unfeeling, misanthropic, and completely disconnected from humanity. But psychological testing often reveals the exact opposite. People who isolate themselves frequently score in the highest possible percentiles for empathy. This sounds mathematically contradictory. If you possess a high capacity to feel what others are feeling, shouldn't you naturally want to surround yourself with people? The answer lies in the mechanics of emotional signal processing. Imagine your capacity for empathy as a highly sensitive radar dish. The average person has a thick, well-insulated filter. They can walk into a room, absorb a little bit of the general mood, and ignore the rest. You do not have that filter. Your radar operates at maximum gain, constantly pulling in raw, unfiltered emotional data from everyone in your vicinity. If you see someone who is quietly anxious, your heart rate actually spikes. If someone is suppressing anger, your nervous system registers the threat. Now, let us quantify this overload. Think of the concept of network density. In a room with just two people, there is only one line of connection, one emotional dynamic to track. But the formula for connections in a group is the number of people, multiplied by that number minus 1, all divided by 2. So if you walk into a dinner party with just 6 people, you are not just tracking 6 individuals. You are mathematically forced to process 15 overlapping, intersecting lines of connection. You are constantly monitoring who is annoyed with whom, the subtle passive-aggressive remarks, the hidden insecurities, and the fake laughter. It is a chaotic, tangled web of toxic and exhausting energy. For the average, low-sensitivity person, this is just a fun Friday night. For you, it is a full-scale, unmitigated attack on your nervous system. You absorb this massive emotional data set directly into your physical body. When the dinner concludes, the rest of the group walks away feeling energized. You drag yourself home feeling like you have just run a cognitive marathon while carrying dead weight. Your decision to isolate is not born out of arrogance or a hatred for humanity. It is a mandatory, calculated survival mechanism. You withdraw from the crowd because you actually care too much. You feel everything with such absolute, crushing intensity that distance is the only way to protect your central processing unit from literally burning out. Finally, we must examine the ultimate historical yield of this lifestyle. When you look at the absolute titans of human progress, the outliers who violently shifted the trajectory of our species, you do not see a history of social butterflies. Consider the lives of Isaac Newton, Nikola Tesla, Ludwig van Beethoven, or the obsessive focus of certain modern innovators. Do you imagine that they spent their prime biological years worrying about their social calendar, managing group dynamics, or seeking validation at local gatherings? Absolutely not. They were relentless, unapologetic loners. Society today is completely consumed by a desperate hunt for fast, cheap dopamine. People spend thousands of hours a year endlessly scrolling, engaging in superficial chatter, and consuming disposable drama. But the solitary mind operates on a completely different timeline and a completely different metric of success. You are not optimizing for temporary Friday night joy. You are optimizing for legacy. When you remove yourself from the constant noise of the tribe, your brain is allowed to enter a specific neurological state called the default mode network. This is the brain's background processing system, and it only powers on when you are completely free from external distraction and immediate tasks. In our modern, hyper-connected world, true boredom and absolute silence are practically extinct. But silence is the required mathematical baseline for profound creativity. If your input channels are constantly jammed with the static of gossip and the chaotic noise of other people's problems, there is zero available bandwidth for a revolutionary idea to form. Let us calculate the value of this reclaimed time. Suppose you eliminate all useless, forced socializing from your schedule. You conservatively reclaim 15 hours a week. That is 15 hours of pure, uninterrupted focus. Over the course of 52 weeks, that compounds into 780 hours of deep work per year. While the crowd is busy spending their hours maintaining fragile social networks, you are investing hundreds of hours into building a private empire. You are writing, coding, designing, or simply thinking at a depth they will never reach. There is a popular, often repeated axiom that states you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. The math of that statement implies that your identity is constantly being diluted and averaged down by the traits, fears, and limitations of your group. So, what happens when you reduce that group to zero? You eliminate the averaging effect entirely. You stop diluting your potential. You become a pure, uncompromised original. You become a limited edition of one, with absolutely no duplicates. So, as we bring this framework to a close, let us redefine the entire concept. If the weekend arrives and your phone remains completely silent, if you have no invitations and no obligations to be anywhere, you must stop allowing societal programming to make you feel inferior. You are not failing at their game. You have simply walked off their playing field to invent your own. While the masses are running frantically away from their own thoughts, terrified of what they might hear in the silence, you are deliberately mining that silence for power. While they are desperately trying to build a fragile safety net of casual acquaintances, you are building an unshakable foundation of self-reliance. You must clearly separate the definition of loneliness from the reality of solitude. Loneliness is the passive, painful state of feeling abandoned by the world. Solitude is the active, powerful, and mathematically superior choice to stand alone. The next time a coworker, a family member, or a stranger asks you why you do not go out more, or why you do not have a squad, you do not owe them a defense. You do not need to explain the neurochemistry of acetylcholine, the mathematics of your social return on investment, or the overwhelming network density of their dinner parties. You can simply smile, secure in the knowledge that you are not missing out on anything of real value. You are simply too busy constructing a masterpiece in the quiet space they are too afraid to enter. Keep protecting your energy. Keep running your own calculations. And never apologize for the brilliant, efficient, and beautiful architecture of your solitude.